Do you ever miss those African-American Christmas desserts no one makes anymore? They once filled kitchens with warmth, sugar, and family. When did we stop tasting Christmas the way they did? Molasses pound cake was the kind of dessert that didn't just sweeten the table. It told a story of making do with what you had. In many African-American homes, especially throughout the South, refined white sugar was a rare luxury, and molasses became the flavor of celebration. Its deep, dark sweetness came from patience and endurance, echoing the same values that carried families through hard times. The dense crumb and rich spice were familiar comforts that filled kitchens with warmth even when money was scarce. Grandmothers measured ingredients by feel, not by cups, and poured in a sense of pride that can't be replicated from a recipe card. A slice of this cake meant togetherness, a sweet that could make even a modest Christmas feel abundant. The aroma alone brought children running, waiting for the moment the first slice was cut and the first crumb hit their tongue. Molasses pound cake wasn't just dessert, it was heritage baked into sugar and spice, reminding every generation that sweetness doesn't have to come from plenty. It can come from perseverance, too. Black walnut cake was the definition of patience and persistence, a dessert that came straight from the trees. Families would gather black walnuts after the autumn winds dropped them to the ground, hands stained from cracking the hard shells open. The scent was earthy and bold, filling kitchens with an aroma that could only come from something truly homegrown. This cake wasn't dainty or delicate. It was robust, flavored with spices that clung to the air and reminded everyone of home. Black walnuts were often a gift from the land, not a purchase from a store, and using them was an act of gratitude as much as tradition. When baked into a Christmas cake, their nutty richness turned humble ingredients into something extraordinary. Served after long church services or during crowded family dinners, it stood proudly on every dessert table. Each slice carried the memory of harvests, hands, and hearts that worked hard for every meal. Few desserts today taste this honest, this rooted in the land and the people who nurtured it. Black walnut cake was more than a recipe. It was the flavor of belonging. Sweet potato pudding was the kind of dish that didn't need decoration to feel like a celebration. Smooth, golden, and kissed with cinnamon, it was a comfort that stretched back through generations of Black Southern kitchens. Sweet potatoes were always within reach, cheap, hearty, and capable of transforming into something beautiful with just a bit of sugar and spice. Families baked this pudding in worn enamel pans, filling homes with the scent of nutmeg and roasted sweetness. It was often the last dish into the oven, made from what was left after the pies and breads were done, proof that even scraps could be turned into love. It was served warm, usually after church on Christmas Day, when everyone was dressed in their Sunday best and laughter spilled across the table. The texture was soft and custard-like, every bite melting on the tongue and bringing quiet contentment. Sweet potato pudding was a dessert that carried dignity. It didn't pretend to be fancy, but it didn't need to. It was enough to fill the heart, not just the plate. Coconut layer cake was a showstopper long before anyone used that word. Its tall, snowy layers stood like a monument to patience, pride, and the power of homemade sweetness. For many African-American families, coconuts were a luxury ingredient, something rare, saved for the holidays when every effort went toward making the day special. Women grated fresh coconut by hand, scraping until their fingers were raw just to create that perfect flurry of white. The boiled icing shimmered like frost, and when it covered the cake, it looked like winter itself had arrived inside the kitchen. It wasn't just dessert, it was art, and it symbolized love poured into every step. When the knife sliced through the layers, it revealed soft yellow sponge, tender and rich from farm eggs and homemade butter. Coconut layer cake was the centerpiece of Christmas tables across the South, reminding everyone that joy could still rise high, even when life tried to flatten you. Vinegar pie was the miracle no one saw coming. Born out of scarcity, it turned the simplest pantry staples into something unexpectedly elegant. When lemons were too costly or unavailable, vinegar stepped in, its sharpness softened by sugar and butter until it became a tangy custard pie, unlike anything else. African-American cooks perfected this balance between frugality and flavor, making do without ever losing touch with creativity. The first bite was sweet, then bright, then comforting, the kind of taste that made you pause just to appreciate it. Vinegar pie was proof that the best recipes often come from necessity, not abundance. During Christmas, when families stretched every dollar and every ingredient, this pie brought a sense of pride and accomplishment. It didn't glitter like a fancy dessert, but it didn't need to. It was a triumph in disguise, a humble, golden masterpiece born from ingenuity. Molasses taffy pulls weren't just treats. They were memories made by hand. In kitchens that smelled of sugar and spice, families would gather around the stove to watch syrup boil into a sticky amber ribbon. When the time came, everyone, from children to grandparents, greased their hands and began the pull. The warm molasses stretched and shone under the light, laughter filling the room as strings of candy stuck to fingers and aprons. This wasn't about perfection, it was about participation. In a time before store-bought sweets, taffy pulls were as much a social ritual as they were dessert making. They turned cold winter nights into community gatherings, moments when hardship took a backseat to joy. The final product was glossy, chewy, and just a little uneven, like life itself. Molasses taffy pulls weren't about what you ate at the end, but about what you made together along the way. Blackberry jam cake was the taste of summer saved for December. Families who picked berries in the heat of July turned those jars of jam into something magical come Christmas. The batter was dark, dense, and fragrant with cloves and cinnamon, each bite hiding a whisper of fruit. Baking one was a patient act. The slow beating, the careful folding, the waiting while the scent filled the house. It wasn't a cake of extravagance, but of memory, bringing the flavor of warmer days to the cold heart of winter. For African-American families, this cake was a reminder that beauty could be preserved, that sweetness didn't fade with the seasons. It was sliced slowly, shared generously, and eaten reverently. The purple crumb stained forks and fingertips, but no one minded. Blackberry jam cake was both past and present on a plate, a memory baked into sweetness. Cornmeal tea cakes were the taste of childhood and the sound of laughter echoing through hallways. Part cookie, part biscuit, they carried the warmth of home in every golden edge. The cornmeal gave them grit and heartiness, a reminder that even simple ingredients could create joy. Grandmothers made them for after-school snacks, church picnics, and Christmas tins alike. The smell of nutmeg and butter meant something good was coming, and the first bite always confirmed it. These little cakes didn't boast, they comforted. They spoke to a time when nothing was wasted, when love was measured in the care it took to knead, shape, and bake. Children would sneak them off cooling racks, their fingertips dusted with crumbs, and mothers would pretend not to notice. Cornmeal tea cakes were more than dessert. They were a promise that sweetness could always find its way back home. Raisin bread pudding with vanilla sauce was proof that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. Stale bread became a canvas for transformation, soaked in milk, sweetened, and brought to life again. Raisins added richness, plumping up in the heat until they burst with syrupy sweetness. The pudding baked slowly, filling the air with the smell of nutmeg and brown sugar. And then came the best part. The vanilla sauce, smooth and glossy, poured over the warm pudding like kindness itself. This dish carried the rhythm of old kitchens, where creativity was the difference between scarcity and abundance. At Christmas, it was often served as the grand finale, simple yet deeply satisfying. Every spoonful was soft, comforting, and impossibly nostalgic. It was more than a way to stretch ingredients. It was a way to stretch joy. Caramel layer cake was the dessert that demanded patience and rewarded devotion. The caramel icing had to be stirred over low heat for what felt like forever, and the smell of sugar turning gold was pure heaven. One careless second, and it would burn. But when it came out right, it gleamed like amber. African-American women guarded their caramel recipes like secrets, each one slightly different, perfected over decades of Christmas dinners. The cake itself was tender and buttery, but the icing was the soul of it, sweet, smoky, and just shy of bitter. Served on special occasions, it was a symbol of pride, proof that skill and care could turn a handful of ingredients into art. The first slice cut through the glossy top like glass, revealing soft layers that seemed to melt in the mouth. No factory-made dessert could ever match it. Caramel layer cake was love, labor, and legacy, all baked into one beautiful confection. Chess pie was the kind of dessert that could silence a noisy room with one bite. Rich, buttery, and golden, it was simple yet decadent, relying on nothing more than eggs, sugar, butter, and a touch of cornmeal. This pie was a quiet triumph of Southern black kitchens, where economy met elegance. The filling puffed gently as it baked, setting into a custard that shimmered when sliced. Served warm or chilled, it was proof that flavor didn't need extravagance. It needed care. Chess pie always appeared at Christmas, often on the table beside sweet potato pie or coconut cake. It was for guests, yes, but also for the family who worked hard all year and deserved something that tasted like reward. The crust was flaky, made from scratch, the kind that broke under a fork but never under pressure. And when that buttery custard touched your tongue, it felt like coming home. Chess pie didn't try to impress. It didn't need to. It already knew it was perfect. Fig preserves cake carried the taste of generosity, of neighbors sharing jars of sweetness wrapped in kitchen towels. Figs grew heavy in backyards across the South, their syrupy fruit turned into preserves that lasted through the winter. Around Christmas, that jam was folded into a dark spiced cake, rich with cinnamon and nutmeg. Every slice was sticky, fragrant, and full of memory, each bite a tribute to the land and labor that made it possible. Women stirred batter slowly, mixing stories into every turn of the spoon. When baked, the cake came out with a deep caramel glow, the fig preserves melting into ribbons of sweetness. It wasn't fancy, but it was precious, passed down through generations like an heirloom. At holiday gatherings, it sat quietly beside flashier desserts, yet always disappeared first. It was the taste of homegrown abundance, the sweetness that money couldn't buy. Fig preserves cake wasn't just food. It was gratitude baked into being. Boiled custard was the southern cousin of eggnog, smoother and gentler, poured cold into glass pitchers that glistened under Christmas lights. It was made with milk, sugar, and eggs whisked patiently over the stove until it thickened just enough to coat the back of a spoon. For African-American families, boiled custard was more than a drink. It was tradition in a cup. Poured into mugs, it carried comfort and familiarity, served to guests with a sprinkle of nutmeg on top. Some added a splash of vanilla or lemon zest, turning it into a secret recipe that no store-bought carton could ever rival. It cooled on windowsills while laughter drifted from the next room, promising a taste of calm after a long day of cooking. Children sipped it carefully, savoring the warmth that lingered even when chilled. Boiled custard was slow-made love, the kind that required both patience and faith that sweetness comes to those who wait. Peanut brittle crackled like glass when broken, a sound that always announced the start of Christmas. Sugar boiled on the stove until golden, and roasted peanuts were stirred in fast, the smell filling the kitchen with toasted sweetness. You needed courage to make it. Just a few seconds too long, and it would scorch beyond repair. But when it turned out right, it shone like amber, sweet and sharp all at once. Every Southern black household had someone who made it best, someone whose brittle snapped perfectly between the teeth. It was candy made with heart and heat, meant to be shared from tins wrapped in ribbon. The pieces stuck to your fingers and sometimes your teeth, but that only made it better. Peanut brittle was a labor of love, born of resourcefulness and shared as generosity. It wasn't bought, it was earned. Sorrel punch cake was the meeting of islands and America on one holiday table. The red petals of dried sorrel, hibiscus, were steeped into syrup, spiced with ginger and clove, and folded into a rich batter that turned the cake a deep crimson. For many African-American families with Caribbean roots, this dessert was more than flavor. It was identity. It carried the tang of hibiscus, the warmth of spice, and the memory of Christmases celebrated across oceans. The aroma was intoxicating, filling kitchens with a scent equal parts floral and fiery. Once baked, it was brushed with more sorrel syrup, glossy and fragrant, a dessert that glowed like ruby glass. Sorrel punch cake connected people to ancestors who had used the same ingredients in a different land for the same reason: to celebrate surviving another year. It was history in sugar and spice, and every bite reminded you that culture can travel far, but it never fades. Pineapple. Upside-down cake was a burst of sunshine on cold December days. With its caramelized fruit rings and cherries shining like jewels, it brought color to tables that had seen too many brown desserts. Pineapple was exotic once, a prized treat that arrived in cans and made even the simplest home feel worldly. For African American families in the mid-century South, this cake was a symbol of hope and joy, a little escape baked right into tradition. The sugar on the pineapples bubbled into a golden glaze, seeping down through the sponge until every crumb was moist and bright. When flipped out of the pan, it was magic, sweet, glossy, and proud. Served warm, it reminded families that celebration didn't need to be grand to be beautiful. Pineapple upside-down cake was optimism on a plate, the promise of sweetness even in the leanest of years. Apple stack cake was never rushed. It took patience, layers, and love. Thin rounds of cake were stacked one over another, each spread with spiced apple filling that soaked slowly into the crumb. The longer it sat, the better it tasted, which meant it was made days before Christmas and guarded carefully until then. African American families in rural towns knew the ritual well, gathering apples, drying them, stewing them into jam that could last the winter. Every layer told a story of preparation and persistence, and when the cake was finally cut, it revealed not indulgence but intention. The taste was warm and deep, cinnamon dancing through every bite. Apple stack cake wasn't made to impress outsiders. It was made to last, to feed, to comfort. It was a dessert that mirrored life itself, built one patient layer at a time. Old-fashioned tea cakes were the heartbeat of Black Southern baking, soft, pale cookies dusted with memory. Their scent of nutmeg and butter was enough to make any child stop in their tracks. Every grandmother had her own way of making them, some using lemon zest, others adding molasses or milk. They weren't for display, they were for family. Often baked on Christmas Eve, they cooled on windowsills as children waited to steal one before bedtime. Each bite was tender and lightly sweet, made not for extravagance but for affection. The dough was rolled with care, cut by hand, and baked until the edges just kissed brown. Tea cakes carried history, tracing back to days when sugar was precious and sweetness had to be stretched. They were more than cookies. They were connection itself, holding stories no cookbook could ever tell. Buttermilk pie was a humble masterpiece, creamy, tangy, and golden under its delicate crust. The ingredients were simple, but together they created something extraordinary. Buttermilk gave the custard its gentle sourness, balancing the sweetness perfectly. For many African American households, this was the pie that appeared when fruit was scarce but love was abundant. Baked in old pie tins, it puffed slightly, then settled into smooth perfection as it cooled. The first slice released the faint scent of vanilla and butter, soft as a sigh. Served after Sunday service or on Christmas night, it reminded everyone that the best desserts didn't need decoration. They needed care, time, and a little faith that something so plain could still feel divine. Buttermilk pie was the quiet soul of Southern holiday tables, steady, simple, and unforgettable. Homemade divinity candy was a winter cloud you could hold in your hand. Whipped from egg whites and sugar syrup, it was as delicate as it was demanding. Too much heat, and it hardened. Too little, and it never set. But when made just right, it was a marvel, soft, snowy, and kissed with vanilla. African American cooks mastered the rhythm of making divinity by sound and feel, trusting instinct more than thermometers. Each batch looked different, but all carried the same promise of sweetness shared freely. Packed into tins lined with wax paper, It was given to neighbors, teachers, and church friends, a sign of goodwill wrapped in sugar. The candy melted like air, leaving behind only warmth. Divinity lived up to its name, a little bit of heaven from hands that had known plenty of hard work on earth. Sweet potato custard was the gentler cousin of pie, the kind of dessert that whispered comfort instead of shouting indulgence. Smooth, velvety, and kissed with nutmeg, it was baked in small ceramic dishes that came warm from the oven, each one meant to be savored slowly. African American families prized sweet potatoes not just for their abundance, but for how versatile they were, a single crop that could stretch through the seasons. During Christmas suppers, this custard appeared alongside stewed greens and cornbread, a quiet finale to a feast built on love and labor. The rich orange filling shimmered beneath a thin golden top, sweetened just enough to please but not overwhelm. The scent of cinnamon and butter filled the room as it baked, mingling with the sound of laughter from relatives reunited once more. Every spoonful carried both sweetness and strength, a small reminder that simplicity could still taste extraordinary. Sweet potato custard was humble, yes, but it was holiday magic all the same. Praline candy was joy you could break apart with your hands. Made from pecans, brown sugar, and butter, it was a Southern tradition that turned thrift into sweetness. The recipe was simple, but making it right required patience, boiling the sugar to the perfect point before it set into glossy, golden clusters. In many African American kitchens, pralines weren't just candy. They were currency of kindness, gifts for neighbors, teachers, or the church choir. The smell of caramel and roasted pecans filled the air, sticking to clothes and memories alike. Cooling on wax paper, the candies hardened into shiny discs that looked like jewels. One bite and the brittle sweetness gave way to creamy richness, pure satisfaction from pantry staples. Every December, hands wrapped them in wax paper or tucked them into tins, tied with ribbon and hope. Praline candy was proof that giving could taste just as sweet as receiving. Spice cake with burnt sugar frosting was December in a single slice. The batter came alive with cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, the air itself turning fragrant as it baked. The frosting, made from caramelized sugar stirred over heat until just shy of bitter, gave the cake a depth no ordinary icing could match. In African American homes, this was the dessert that marked the true arrival of Christmas. A cake as warm and dark as the evenings that gathered around the fire. It was the kind of flavor that wrapped around you, familiar and full of story. Burnt sugar took skill and instinct, the sort of technique passed from one hand to another, not written down. When the frosting met the spice, it became something greater, sweet, smoky, and soulful. Slices were served with coffee or warm milk, every bite grounding you in comfort. It wasn't just cake, it was memory-baked golden brown and shared with love. Jelly roll cake was the kind of dessert that made children gasp and adults smile with recognition. It started as a thin sponge cake, baked light and springy, then spread with homemade jam and rolled into a perfect spiral. The surface was dusted with powdered sugar that shimmered like new snow under lamplight. It looked elegant, but the beauty was in its honesty. Soft cake, simple jam, no pretension. For many African American families, the jelly roll appeared at Christmas dinners, a sign that celebration was finally in full swing. It was a cake that traveled well, too, carried to church socials wrapped in wax paper and tied with string. The first slice revealed a swirl of color that drew quiet admiration before the fork even touched the plate. It was cheerful, nostalgic, and impossibly satisfying, a dessert that managed to feel both fancy and familiar. Jelly roll cake was the sweet simplicity of togetherness, rolled into one. Coconut custard pie was what holiday elegance looked like without extravagance. The crust, flaky and buttery, held a silky filling made from eggs, milk, sugar, and a generous handful of shredded coconut. As it baked, the edges browned and the center puffed ever so slightly, creating a dessert both delicate and hearty. It wasn't just a pie. It was a piece of continuity passed through generations of African American kitchens. The smell was pure comfort. a mix of toasted coconut and vanilla that lingered in the air long after the oven cooled. It was often served chilled, the texture creamy and smooth, with every bite balancing sweetness and depth. At Christmas gatherings, it stood quietly beside fruitcakes and puddings, content in its understated perfection. Coconut custard pie didn't ask for attention. It earned it with every spoonful. It was proof that simple ingredients, treated with care, could feel like luxury on the tongue. Steamed plum pudding was an echo of both English and Caribbean holiday tables, transformed by African-American creativity. Instead of plums, it used dried fruits, raisins, dates, and currants, soaked in molasses and sometimes rum, rich enough to perfume the whole house. The pudding was steamed for hours in a cloth or tin, turning dense and dark, like treasure uncovered on Christmas Day. Each slice was sticky, spiced, and fragrant. The taste of tradition passed across oceans. Families poured a warm sauce over the top, often sweetened cream or brandy glaze, that melted into the crumb. This dessert carried ancestry in its aroma, blending old world and new into something uniquely its own. It was a symbol of endurance and adaptation, a recipe that refused to disappear despite changing times. Steamed plum pudding wasn't just eaten. It was honored, remembered, and celebrated. Brown sugar chess squares were the dessert of togetherness, the treat everyone knew would appear at the church Christmas social. Gooey in the center, buttery at the edges, and sprinkled with a little extra sugar on top, they were impossible to resist. Made from pantry staples like eggs, flour, and brown sugar, these bars proved that a few ingredients could create something divine. They baked into a layered miracle: crispy base, soft custard middle, and a caramelized crust that cracked under a fork. Wrapped in foil or stacked in Tupperware, they traveled from kitchen to kitchen, never arriving without a story. For African-American families, they represented more than sweetness. They were hospitality itself, shared freely and with love. You could count on at least one batch to appear on every dessert table, disappearing faster than anyone would admit. Brown sugar chess squares were joy cut into perfect squares, a tradition that never needed rewriting. Lemon snow pudding was light as air, a bright contrast to the heavy holiday feasts that filled most tables. Made from lemon juice, sugar, and gelatin, it shimmered when chilled, like captured sunlight in a bowl. African-American cooks loved how it refreshed the palate, offering something cool and lively after all the pies and puddings. Whipped egg whites folded into the mixture gave it a frothy, cloud-like texture, soft enough to melt on the tongue. It was elegance made from thrift, proof that even simple pantry ingredients could feel luxurious. Served in glass dishes, the pale yellow pudding looked like gold under candlelight. It wasn't a loud dessert, but it made its presence known with quiet grace. Lemon snow pudding reminded everyone that celebration didn't always have to be rich. It could be light, pure, and full of life. Some families would chill it overnight, letting it set perfectly for Christmas afternoon when everyone needed something bright after the savory feast. A spoonful would dissolve instantly, leaving behind the faint tang of citrus and the sweetness of shared laughter. It carried a certain dignity in its simplicity, an understated reminder that sophistication didn't need extravagance. It was the taste of winter sunlight, fleeting yet unforgettable, gentle yet full of warmth. Homemade peppermint ice cream was Christmas joy frozen in time. Back when refrigerators were rare luxuries, families took turns hand-churning ice cream in wooden barrels packed with ice and salt. The result was smooth, creamy perfection kissed with the cool sharpness of peppermint. Even in the chill of winter, no one complained about the cold spoonfuls. It was a treat too rare to refuse. Bits of crushed peppermint sticks gave it color, flecking the pale cream with festive red. In African-American homes, making it was as much about the laughter that filled the room as the dessert itself. The rhythmic turning of the handle became a family symphony, marking the holiday spirit in every churn. Served in small bowls, it melted fast, but the memory lingered far longer. Peppermint ice cream was proof that joy needed no season, only willing hands. Sometimes it was made alongside vanilla or chocolate batches, so guests could choose their favorite. but peppermint always stood out. It tasted like Christmas itself. The aroma filled the air as the cream froze slowly, every churn heavy with anticipation. Children watched eagerly, waiting for the first scoop, while adults smiled at the nostalgia it carried. Even long after the last bite, its crisp sweetness lingered. A simple pleasure turned into holiday ritual. Sweet molasses crinkles were Christmas in cookie form, soft, chewy, and fragrant with ginger and clove. Their dark, sugared tops cracked as they baked, leaving delicate patterns that looked like winter frost. Made with pantry staples and a splash of molasses, they were a favorite in African American kitchens where thrift met artistry. The smell alone could make a house feel festive, curling through every room like a promise. Once cooled, they were packed into tins lined with wax paper, the kind that would later be tied with string and given to neighbors or teachers. They tasted of warmth, of hearth and heritage, and every bite carried the subtle spice of care. Children loved them with milk, adults with coffee, but everyone agreed they belonged to Christmas. Sweet molasses crinkles were the cookie version of comfort, simple yet unforgettable, proof that love often comes in small, round packages. Sometimes families made dozens at once, turning entire afternoons into cookie-making marathons, each tray emerging from the oven with the same golden brown glow. The first batch rarely lasted long enough to cool. Their aroma clung to every coat and sleeve, so even after the holidays ended, the scent brought the memory rushing back. In every soft crumb was a reminder that sweetness is best when shared. Fruitcake wrapped in foil was more tradition than treat, baked weeks ahead with patience and care. Dense with dried fruit, nuts, and a generous pour of rum or brandy, it aged slowly until the flavors melted together like family stories retold each year. The smell alone, sweet, spiced, and faintly boozy, was unmistakable. Every household had its version, some darker with molasses, others lighter with golden raisins and citrus peel. Wrapped tightly in foil and sometimes soaked again, it was a dessert meant to last through the season. Neighbors exchanged slices wrapped in wax paper, often tied with ribbon, each one a gesture of friendship and faith. The first bite was chewy, rich, and full of time. Proof that good things didn't happen quickly. Even those who joked about disliking fruitcake smiled when one arrived at their door. It wasn't about taste as much as memory, a recipe that carried love across distance and years. Hickory nut milk delivered rich nutrition from the forests when dairy was limited or unavailable. Hickory nuts were cracked and pounded into a fragrant paste, then steeped in hot water and strained to produce a creamy liquid full of natural oils and protein. This drink could be enjoyed warm as a morning beverage or used to enrich cornbread and porridges, offering sustenance without reliance on cow's milk. The technique drew directly from indigenous American practices, which African cooks learned and adapted to their own needs. Hickory trees were plentiful across the Southeast, ensuring a steady supply for those willing to gather and crack the tough shells. Even after emancipation, rural families continued making hickory milk for special dishes, and some Appalachian recipes still call for it today. Its smooth flavor and nourishing qualities illustrate how African American cooks combined local knowledge and old-world methods to create foods of lasting value. Hickory nut milk stands as a quiet but powerful symbol of ingenuity, linking the forest's bounty to a tradition of resilience and culinary skill. Fried green tomatoes offered a bright tang and a satisfying crunch that made them a favorite in roadside cafes and family kitchens throughout the South. Firm, unripe tomatoes were sliced thick, dredged in seasoned cornmeal, and pan-fried in sizzling oil until their edges turned golden and crisp. The tart bite of the green tomato softened as it cooked, blending with the savory coating to create a flavor both lively and comforting. Volunteers and travelers found this dish at small cafes along the routes between rallies and marches, a welcome stop for a quick and memorable meal. Grandmothers served them at home as well, often with a dollop of creamy dressing or a sprinkle of fresh herbs from the garden. Fried green tomatoes became more than a snack. They represented the creativity of Southern cooks who turned an early harvest into something special. Their cheerful crunch and bright flavor brought energy and a sense of place to gatherings that fueled the civil rights movement and reminded everyone of the resourceful kitchens that kept spirits high. Persimmon pudding was a sweet way to turn what the land gave freely into comfort for families with little else. Wild persimmons were foraged in the fall, their tart fruit ripening into sweetness after frost. Housewives mashed the pulp with eggs, milk, and flour when they had it, baking it into a dense, moist pudding. The dish filled kitchens with a warm aroma, bringing a sense of celebration to ordinary days. Children loved it because it felt like dessert, even when sugar was scarce and the pudding leaned more rustic than refined. Persimmons grew wild in many areas of the South, making them a gift for families struggling through segregation and poverty. The pudding was never fancy, but it carried a sweetness that softened the edges of hard times. Over the years, it has faded from common memory, yet it once stood as a reminder that survival sometimes tasted sweet, even when the world outside felt bitter and unfair. Candlelight midnight services turned churches into sanctuaries of peace, memory, and praise. The lights dimmed slowly until only the soft flicker of candles filled the room, casting gold on white choir robes. Each flame represented a prayer, a life, or a thank you whispered into the stillness. The choir began to sing, voices rising gently at first, then blooming into harmonies that filled every corner of the sanctuary. The pastor spoke with reverence, his tone low and steady, reminding everyone that light still shines in darkness. Families sat shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped, hearts lifted. Children's eyes glowed wide as they held candles too tightly, wax dripping onto their fingers unnoticed. Outside, frost gathered on car windows, but inside, warmth radiated like grace itself. When midnight came, a hush swept the room before the final chorus swelled, pure, strong, and full of faith. People left changed, their spirits lighter, their hearts overflowing. The night lingered in memory long after the candles were blown out. Roasted gourd seeds turned the remnants of pumpkins and native gourds into a vital source of fat and minerals. After the flesh was cooked for soups or pies, seeds were washed, lightly salted, and spread near the hearth to dry before roasting. This simple preparation produced a crunchy, nutrient-rich snack that stored well through the winter and could be ground into meal or used to thicken stews. Similar seed roasting traditions existed across West Africa, where pumpkin and melon seeds were prized for both flavor and nutrition, and those techniques crossed the Atlantic with enslaved people. Over time, roasted pumpkin seeds became a familiar autumn treat in American households, sold at fairs and enjoyed during harvest celebrations. The practice illustrates how African culinary memory merged with indigenous crops, creating a food that moved from necessity to seasonal pleasure. Roasted gourd seeds continue to appear in modern kitchens and farmers markets, carrying with them the history of careful saving and the resourceful spirit that turned every part of the plant into nourishment. Peach cobbler carried the sweetness of Georgia orchards and the comfort of a dessert tied to Martin Luther King's Atlanta roots. Juicy peaches were sliced and simmered with sugar and a hint of cinnamon before being blanketed with biscuit dough or a buttery crust that baked to golden perfection. The bubbling fruit filled kitchens with a fragrant steam that signaled a treat for every sense. Served warm with fresh cream or a scoop of homemade ice cream, peach cobbler offered hospitality and pride in local harvests. Church gatherings and planning meetings often ended with generous servings of this beloved dessert, bringing smiles and a taste of home to activists far from their own families. The dish celebrated the abundance of the South while reinforcing the bonds of community and the sweetness of shared effort. Peach cobbler remains a timeless emblem of Georgia comfort, reminding everyone that the fight for justice was sustained by flavors that spoke of family, tradition, and enduring hope. Sun-dried apples were an essential survival food, made by slicing apples thin and laying them out to dry in the sun. Families filled baskets and sheets with fruit, turning fresh harvests into supplies that could last through the winter. The dried slices were chewy and sweet, eaten as snacks or rehydrated in pies and stews. Housewives valued them because they preserved abundance when storage was scarce. Children looked forward to them, sneaking dried pieces as soon as they cooled. Drying fruit meant that a good harvest could be stretched into lean months when little else was available. The process required patience and careful attention, but it gave families a sense of security. Sun-dried apples became part of pantry shelves across the South, often stored in jars or sacks for later use. Though largely forgotten in modern kitchens, they were once vital for survival, a way to capture the sweetness of summer and carry it into the hardest winters of the Jim Crow South. Kool-Aid punch bowls turned every Christmas gathering into a carnival of color and sweetness. The liquid sparkled under kitchen lights, swirling with sherbet foam that shimmered like snow in a glass. The fizzing sound of ginger ale mixed with giggles as children crowded close, watching spoons stir magic into motion. Moms or aunties in aprons always claimed one last taste test, pretending to check for flavor, but smiling at the excuse for another sip. The scent of sugar and fruit filled the air, mixing with the smell of ham baking in the oven and pine from the tree. No party table was complete without that glowing centerpiece, surrounded by paper cups waiting to be filled. When the first ladle poured, cheers and chatter followed like clockwork. It was simple, bright, and full of life, proof that joy didn't need expense, just imagination. Kool-Aid Punch wasn't just a drink. It was the sparkle of childhood itself, poured generously for all. Wild grape connected plantation kitchens to the native abundance of the American South. Muscadine and Scuppernong grapes grew untended along fences and forest edges, providing a dependable late summer harvest. Enslaved workers gathered the clusters and crushed them by hand to create a tangy juice that could be fermented slightly for a refreshing drink or boiled into a syrupy must used to season grains and greens. This technique echoed West African traditions of using fruit reductions to brighten savory dishes. After emancipation, muscadine wine and homemade grape jellies became hallmarks of Southern foodways, and small farms still produce them today. The careful gathering and slow simmering required patience and skill, qualities that defined the cooking of those who made the most of every wild resource. Wild grape stands as both a practical recipe and a testament to how African American cooks merged Old World techniques with New World ingredients, leaving a flavor that continues to shape regional preserves and beverages across the Carolinas and Georgia. Collard greens with ham hocks carried the flavor of resilience and the slow patience of Southern cooking, qualities that mirrored the steady resolve of the civil rights struggle. Fresh collard leaves were washed carefully and simmered for hours with smoked ham hocks, onions, and a touch of vinegar until the greens softened into a tender, savory stew. The smoky pork enriched the broth known as potlikker, a nutrient-rich liquid that families sipped or soaked up with cornbread to capture every drop of nourishment. These greens were served at community gatherings and late-night planning sessions, where activists and neighbors shared meals that strengthened both body and resolve. Children learned early that the long, simmering pot represented tradition and hope, carrying the taste of generations who endured hardship with grace. Collard greens with ham hocks remain a living symbol of perseverance and the belief that simple ingredients, when treated with care, can provide powerful comfort and lasting connection during times of great challenge and change. Hoe cakes were more than just a meal. They were survival cooked into thin cornmeal rounds right on a griddle or even on the flat side of a hoe over the fire. Families without flour or yeast relied on cornmeal, salt, and water, sometimes adding a little fat if they had it. The cakes cooked quickly and could be eaten plain, with syrup, or alongside beans and greens. For many, they were the daily bread, dependable and filling even when money was gone and choices were few. Children grew up with hoe cakes as part of life, learning early that a handful of meal could feed everyone if you knew how to stretch it. They were humble, yet powerful, proof that ingenuity kept people alive during years of hardship. Though rarely seen now, hoe cakes remain a symbol of strength, resourcefulness, and the will to survive against every obstacle. Their simplicity carries a history of resilience that still speaks when they are remembered on Southern tables. Christmas church pageants were the highlight of every holiday season, where faith met creativity and children became storytellers. The Nativity came alive under fluorescent lights as Mary, Joseph, and wise men walked the aisles in bathrobes and tinsel crowns. Mothers adjusted halos, fathers set up folding chairs, and everyone whispered reminders from the front pew. Choirs sang "O Holy Night" with a rhythm that felt like hope itself. It was more than a show. It was community in motion, a living story told through young voices that trembled but never stopped. The applause that followed wasn't for perfection, but for participation, pride, and the promise of continuity. These performances stitched families together, reminding everyone that Christmas was about faith, not grandeur. The church smelled of pine, perfume, and wax candles, and the air buzzed with joy. Even after the curtains closed, the echoes of those songs lingered long into the night. Which of these forgotten Christmas desserts would you bring back to your own table? Share your favorite in the comments, and if you felt the warmth of history in every bite, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories that taste like home.